Good morning, I'm Jose.
And I'm his brother, Jeff. Welcome to Online Worship. It's so great to have you join us. We're excited to be continuing our summer series, Road Trip, Riding Shotgun with Paul.
Our Kids Link pastor, Ariel, has a great message lined up for us that you won't want to miss.
Kids and students, you can follow our Kids Link and Next Gen Facebook pages for an experience made just for you.
If you're joining us through Facebook or YouTube, we would love for you to like, share, and subscribe.
If you need prayer, or if you have any questions at all, please click the link to fill out a connection card. Enjoy the service.
And I searched the world, but it couldn't feel me. Man's empty praise, treasures that fade, never enough. Then you came along, and you put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. And oh, there's nothing that's better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. And I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain, yeah, 'cause he's the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. No, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. No, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. Hey! And you turn mourning to dancing, and you give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing, and you give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into army. You turn seas into highways. And you're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. No, there's nothing that's better than you. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. And oh, there's nothing, no, better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing
children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you
Hello, Landing Place. Thank you for letting me come and share your space today. I am very excited to be here with you for episode 8 of our road trip series, Riding Shotgun with Paul. And if you've been joining us this summer, we've talked a lot about how Paul shared the good news everywhere he went. And today we get to look at how his fantastic ministry strategy played out in Ephesus. Now, to boil it down, it was a horrible, no good, very bad day for Paul. Now, if you are a Jesus follower today, we're going to take a closer look at what it means to share our faith. And if you're just checking out this whole Jesus thing, we are going to shed some light on why people find hope in Jesus. Now, if you've ever taken a road trip, you know that it requires some level of navigation. And I, for one, and I know I can't be the only one, am truly horrible at navigation. Now, this first started to come to light in my life when I was a kid, and my sister and I would go on these awesome adventures to the local corner store or to the local library, and my sister always knew how to get home, and I never knew how to get home. Then, in college, I was constantly finding myself on the opposite end of campus from where all of my classes were. So, in my early 20s, I decided that I was going to run an experiment. I thought, I am so bad at this that I'll bet you, if I just went the exact opposite way of wherever I thought I should go, I'll probably get to where I'm trying to be. So, for example, if I knew that there was a Target on 120th, and I was pretty sure that I needed to turn right to get there, I would instead go left. And wouldn't you know it, my ability to get where I was trying to go increased substantially. Now that is a sad but very, very true story. Now, have you ever noticed that people that are really good with directions and navigation, they always know where north is? Even in states where the Rocky Mountains aren't throwing you a bone by being west all the time, you can just ask them, where's north? And they just point. Like, they just know. And maybe you're like me and you thought, well, using a compass is a good way to always tell where north is. And when I was looking into some things for this message, I discovered that there are actually two kinds of north. There's true north and there's magnetic north. Now, the difference is that true north is consistent and stable. It never changes. Magnetic north can actually vary a handful of degrees off from where true north is, depending on where you are. So, Paul had to do a lot of navigating on his road trip, and he found himself in Ephesus just as some serious trouble was brewing in response to the growing influence of Christianity. Now, Paul had a lot of navigating to do on his trip, not only in the physical terrain, but also in the spiritual journeys that people were on. And in Ephesus, Paul discovered that when it comes to spiritual journeys, not everyone has the same idea of where north is. So for Paul, true north was Jesus. Jesus was his consistent, stable key to making sense of the world around him. Holy Spirit would guide Paul from place to place, always in pursuit of fulfilling God's will for Paul, which was to share the good news with everyone that he encountered. And in Acts 19:24, we meet a man named Demetrius. Now, he was a very successful silversmith who manufactured shrines of the Greek god Artemis. Now, this god, she was truly idolized in Ephesus. They would make sacrifices to Artemis. They had traditions where they would worship her and worship her idols. To this day, her temple is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And it was such a deep-rooted part of their culture that their entire economy relied on people idolizing Artemis. Demetrius made his living, had a reputation, and enjoyed tremendous prestige because he made and sold statues, known as idols, of Artemis. Now, for Demetrius, true north was Artemis. She was his consistent, stable key to navigating the world around him. So when the good news came and people started worshiping Jesus instead of Artemis, the world, as Demetrius knew it, turned completely upside down. His man-made idols began to lose value as people began worshiping Jesus instead. His career was jeopardized. His image of being important in the culture and the economy started to blur as the economy began to falter. The ideas that held Ephesus together were being questioned and in danger of being totally revamped in light of this new revelation of Jesus' death and resurrection. And in response to all of this, Demetrius calls his fellow tradesmen together, and he says in Acts 19:25 through 26, "Gentlemen, you know that our wealth comes from this business, but as you have seen and heard, this man Paul has persuaded many people that handmade gods aren't really gods at all." That's also translated as man-made gods aren't really gods at all, or idols aren't really gods at all. Now, if you're like me, when you hear the word idol, you just cringe a little inside. And that's just because the word idol is a very religious sounding word. And in cases like Ephesus, it's referring to a physical, man-made representation of a deity. And when I first read this passage in Acts, I thought, well, those ancient people did a lot of super kooky things. So glad that I don't have idols. And then I decided, I had a little bit of a gut check, and I thought, I should probably just look up this definition, just to be sure, right? And I found that it says, idol is an image or other material object representing a deity to which religious worship is addressed. Whew, I'm in the clear. But then it said, any person or thing regarded with blind admiration, adoration, or devotion. Now, when I read that definition, I felt that peaceful, uncomfortable hand of conviction fall on me. And I started to think about the things that we idolize in society today, the things that I can idolize this week and in my life today. And a few things popped into my mind. We can worship material possessions and start idolizing material possessions, like an expensive TV or a car or a game system or nice clothes. And I can hear some of you saying, hold on, can that really be the same as an idol? Well, let's check it out. Those things are man-made, and they can be adored or worshipped when they become more important than other things, like financial stability or the relationships that we have with the people around us, or when we connect our ownership of them to our value as a human being. Another thing that I know I've caught myself idolizing is image. On social media and with our HOAs and with our Instagram perfect photo shoots, we idolize image. Our image absolutely qualifies as man-made after we have used our filters and photoshops and staged everything. And it can be adored or worshipped when our image becomes more important than honesty or accountability. When we have to be seen as better than we know that we are. Also, success. Now, wait a minute, success sounds like a really good thing, right? But we can idolize success in our careers, with our sports teams, in our parenting, because look at how we're measuring it. We measure success by man-made standards, instead of how Jesus would have us define it. And every time that we pursue success in one area, and that becomes more important than what Jesus would have us define as success, we've gone off track. So you see, it's not the man-made thing itself that's bad. Success isn't bad. Material things are not bad. Image isn't bad, but it's the elevation of those things above God Himself that leads us to failure. That elevation is what makes it an idol. And the secret that nobody tells you, that I want you to know today, is that whatever we idolize becomes our personal true north. meaning that whatever we idolize becomes our key to understanding and navigating the world around us. Whatever we idolize becomes our personal true north. But unlike true north, which is consistent and stable, idols are relative and situational. Because anything man-made has flaws. Idols may seem to guide us, but when we follow that direction, we're off, because they were really more like a magnetic north the whole time. Now, the benefit of elevating God above all else is that then, like Paul, Jesus can become our true north. He can become the consistent, stable key for navigating our life. We were designed to follow our Creator, to blaze trails that He predestined for us. So when we put an idol in His place, it's not long before we're off track. We were made to be led by something. And when we let Jesus be that something, it leads to life and hope and victory. And when we put anything else in His place, we get off track. Because whatever we're following will guide our actions, the choices we make, and how we use our resources. Now, Demetrius was experiencing the confusion and anger that comes when we let that happen. His world was on its head, his work was on its head, and his daily life was altered and impacted. Now, let's pause there for just a second. Does that sound familiar, my post-pandemic friends? We all know, especially in this season, what that feels like. We know how it feels to have our way of life thrown on its head. And we know how it feels to have our role redefined without our permission. We know how it is to watch our lifestyle do a 180 and our economy threaten to reinvent itself in light of some unforeseen event. And here is the beauty of being a Jesus follower and the hope that we find in Him. When life gets angry and confused and upside down, and the culture around us is shifting, we are able to navigate when Jesus is our guide. Believers find ourselves with story after story after story of how the pursuit of knowing, really knowing Jesus, has led us to life. We have stories of how the pursuit of knowing Jesus has led us out of depression and led us out of fear. We have stories of restored relationships and miraculous provision, and these stories are our good news. They lead people to understand how Jesus' death 2,000 years ago and His resurrection changes our lives today. So the big idea for today is that cultural shifts give us the opportunity to look at what idols we're allowing to guide us and then choose to follow Jesus instead. So there are 3 things that we can learn from this story today that will help us navigate when idols are challenged or exposed. And here's the first one. Identify your idols. Now you may be wondering, how do we recognize an idol? And actually, it's really, really easy. Because since our idols become our true north, we simply follow the trails that we've left. Specifically, we follow the trails of where we've spent our money and where we spent our time, because those trails lead us directly to who we are following. Some other clues that tell us when we're following an idol as opposed to Jesus is that we will feel really defensive when that gets challenged. We might even, like Demetrius, gather all our like-minded friends around and talk about how that guy is ruining our life. But when we can recognize these clues that we have idols in our lives, we can change course. And there's grace for that because Jesus knew how messy it was going to be to navigate this life. Jesus gives us hope because knowing Him exposes when we're off track from living a life of love and freedom and victory for everyone. The culture shift in Ephesus gave Demetrius and everyone around him the opportunity to identify their idols and follow Jesus instead, but he didn't take it. It takes courage to change course. It's hard to change course, but we can do hard things with Jesus as our guide. Now, the second thing we can take away today is know when to walk away. So remember earlier when I said that this was a horrible, no good, very bad day for Paul? Well, what started with Demetrius rallying his friends against Paul turned into a mob. And we read later on in Acts 19 that people's anger started to boil because of Demetrius's words. And soon people were shouting, then people were shouting one thing, and other people were shouting another thing. And next thing you know, it's a huge riot, and the entire city rushes down to the amphitheater. And for hours, they are in a dangerously angry confusion. And we can learn from believers and what they did in response to that. Because as this riot started and people rushed to the amphitheater and everything was in confusion for hours, the believers knew when to walk away. Now, Paul wanted to go in and say something, but the believers around him recognized that that would not be a wise choice, and they actually held him back. And what we can learn from this is that there are actually times where our words don't matter. And nothing that we do in that moment is going to change an established culture. Now, that does not mean that a culture will not eventually change, because Christians remained in Ephesus long after Paul had left it. It may just mean that on that day, your presence is no longer required. There's a time to share your good news, and once you've been obedient, it may be time for you to walk away from a situation. Now, hear me. Don't walk away from a person. Walk away from a situation. You can't solve a problem when people don't know what's going on, and you can't have a healthy conversation when everyone just wants to fight. Spiritual journeys are marathons, not sprints. And that's why it's important for us to recognize the times when we just need to know when to walk away. Now, the third thing that we can learn from this is that pushback is okay. Now, since idols guide us in a multitude of ways, it only makes sense that some people are going to push back if the good news is bad news for their idols. Now, even if you're not being a jerk about sharing your faith, it's possible that people will push back because asking them to consider displacing whatever they've held higher than Jesus is probably asking them to let go of their identity, to let go of their worldview, and let go of the very thing that they have used to navigate this crazy life up to this point. You're asking them to abandon that for something that they have never encountered. And you're asking them to abandon that for someone that they have never met. And I hope that we can empathize with that pushback when it comes. I hope that we can share our faith and still be able to listen to the struggle when anger comes as a response. I hope that we can respect people on every part of their spiritual journey to follow Jesus, especially if they are acting ugly. And I hope that we will pray for wisdom and not let the potential for a mess stop us from sharing our faith and sharing what Jesus has done for us in our darkest hours. Expect some people to push back, but don't dismiss them. Try to listen for the pain that letting go of their idols would cause them, and look for ways to love them, because no person is the enemy. Now, Demetrius could not hear the message because he held so tightly to his idols. The man-made statues, the image, the success, but not only that. In response to the good news, he actually mobilized Ephesus against Paul to push back against the culture shift that they were experiencing. His idol became his true north, and it led him away from everything that Jesus had for him. We can be different than that today. We can be different this week. We can change course where needed and allow Jesus to be our guide. It's the pursuit of knowing Jesus, seeing him in our lives and putting his will above all else that steers us to freedom. And when we refuse to hold anything man-made higher than God, we can follow his true north and navigate even the worst situations. Let's pray together today. God, I thank you for the example that you gave us in Paul, and I ask that your presence would be with us this week and today and right now, wherever we're hearing these words, God. And I ask that your presence would just give us the courage that we need to see where you're asking us to change course, that you would give us the courage that we need to let go of the idols that we hold and to experience life in your footsteps and following where you lead us. God, I ask that your presence would be with everyone and that we would be able to take a second today and take some time this week to look at who we're following and to follow our own trails and to see what you have for us. Jesus, thank you for sending yourself to come. Thank you for dying for us. And thank you that we have the opportunity to make different choices today. Amen. Now, before we go this week, there is one question that I'd like us to spend just a little time to consider. And that is, where in your life is God leading you to change course?
Thank you, Ariel, for such a great message on direction, and thank you for joining us.
If you have recently made the decision to follow Jesus and you would like to know what the next steps are, if you are in need of prayer, click the link for a connection card.
And if you would like to live generously, it's easy to give online by clicking the generosity link provided. We would like to sincerely thank you for partnering with us to invest in what God cares about the most, people.
In response to today's message, we would love for you to process this question. Where in your life is God leading you to change direction?
Now, I'd like to invite you to continue this discussion with our online host who will stick around for a few more minutes, or maybe you want to start a discussion with someone you know. Have a great day, my friends.
Que tengan un gran día, amigos.